theorist and urbanist. He holds a doctorate in mathematical physics from Stony Brook University, New York. Salingaros published research on algebras, electromagnetic fields, and thermonuclear fusion before turning to architecture and urbanism. Key publications include the book Algorithm Sustainable Design, Anti-Architecture and Deconstruction, A Theory of Architecture, Principle of Urban Structure, and Unified Architectural Theory, plus numerous scientific articles. He co-authored with Michael Mehaffey the books Design for a Living Planet and A New Pattern Language for Growing Regions. He is editor of many professional journals covering architecture, design, and urbanism. He collaborated with visionary architect Christopher Alexander in editing the 4-volume The Nature of Order. Salingaros won the 2019 Stockholm Culture Award for Architecture and shared the 2018 Clem Labine Traditional Building Award with Michael Mehaffey. We would like to continue the presentation, and Nikos, you could take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Janvi, for the introduction. It's a great pleasure to be giving this talk in Mumbai. I wish I were there, but the COVID restrictions make travel difficult. I have put this talk together, and you will have to show the slides, and then I will indicate when to change the slides. Excellent, this is it. I will try to make a few points that are relevant to Mumbai in particular, and India in general. I have been collaborating with architects in India. My good friend Narendra Dengle, who is on the faculty at your institution, wrote me that unfortunately today he has something else, so he could not attend. So let's move slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Let's start into the meat. Okay, next slide, please. So let me begin with a bang, with a strong statement to position ourselves in the current situation. Planning laws that are responsible for the way cities look. Going back to the 30s and 40s, the planning laws we are working with were written for the automobile and petroleum companies to make a lot of money at the expense of everyone else. That means the people. That is why this is behind the monofunctional zoning, which took over in Europe and the United States after the Second World War, namely to separate all the uses in order to force people to use their cars by separating the historic urban fabric that contained all the everyday functions, so that could be accomplished by walking, which is still true in many parts in India, but I will immediately say that the intent is to undo and destroy what has worked for thousands of years, which is a tightly connected pedestrian city, in order for a few companies to make a lot of money and in order to use fossil energy. Now, one has to ignore all the vast amount of disinformation from the press and the media who talk about sustainability and energy saving. That is really misleading. The purpose of the energy companies acting with corrupt government is to force people to use as much energy as possible so they can make as much amount of money as possible. This is deliberate policy. Okay, once we understand that, a lot of things become clear. But it is difficult to get this understanding behind the clouds of deliberate misinformation. May I have the next slide, please? So we are given utopian visions of giant skyscrapers sitting in a vast expanse of lawn. That's totally ridiculous. It doesn't work. There are no vast expanses of lawn. Once you have giant skyscrapers, then they're all clustered close together, and all open space in the city is killed. We have the example in downtown cities in India, but the worst example is China. China used to have fairly sustainable urban fabric, destroyed all of that in order to turn into a completely energy consumers society with horrible, horrible problems. The problems in pollution are common in China and in India. Those are the result of the energy use. New cities in Central Asia are unwalkable. They're totally dependent upon energy use. In order to implement this utopian dream, the people cut down, or not people, government authorities cut down trees in order to put in even more parking on roads. This has happened to a great extent in India. This is a crime against the city because it raises the temperature. Now, since temperature is already rising by global warming, if you add 5 degrees temperature rise on top by cutting down trees, then you are morally responsible for any deaths due to heat that are going to start occurring in the summers in the very, very near future. May I have the next slide, please? So what can we do to fight this misinformation that has become the accepted policy? Our schools are teaching modernist errors as truth. I say modernist because planning and energy use really are key concepts that emerged in the 1920s and 30s with pioneer modernist architects. Since then, since the end of the Second World War, they are codified in planning regulations. So we have the entire state system that hires traffic engineers. The traffic engineers have guidelines, they have their books. That's the legal design guidelines that they have to obey by law. They are destroying the urban fabric. The only solution is to scrap all of that and to use adaptive design and citizen-centered planning. So we have to involve the future users in planning. Now, this has always been there, citizen involvement in planning. It is marginalized. It has been pushed aside and suppressed by the state because it is a threat to the giant state machine of planning. But what I'm telling you, and you don't have to believe me, what I'm telling you is that the future of cities relies upon what has been up until now a very marginal kind of planning. And in fact, my friends in India, like Kirti Shah, are the ones that have for decades try to go along in order to use user participation in planning on the margins of official planning. May I have the next slide, please? So let's look at the background behind of this. By forcing connections through the automobile, you get monofunctional zoning and vice versa. Le Corbusier is the architect principally responsible for this crime against cities. He was paid by the auto manufacturer to just totally rebuild Paris. So Gabriel Voisin was making cars in the 1920s. So Le Corbusier introduced the Radiant City, fit only for cars, and he has the well-known plans for totally destroying Paris and building a car-centered city of isolated skyscrapers. He did this for money. Now, in a separate development, the United States, including Los Angeles, surprise, surprise, the world's most unfriendly pedestrian city. Los Angeles, major cities in the United States have very well-functioning tramways. those were bought up by a conglomerate of car manufacturers and energy and tire manufacturers, and they were dismantled. And there was a federal court case that found these companies guilty and fined them, I think, $1,000, which is, these companies had made billions of dollars by destroying the public transport in the cities in order to sell their cars. And this is one of the great secrets of the decline of US cities. May I have the next slide, please? So my appeal, or our appeal, the group of people around the world who are trying to make human cities again, the appeal is to policymakers, because they will have to make the decisions. They will have to adopt transformations that generate living environments. What are our models for living environments? We have to reuse what has worked in the past versus what has been an abysmal failure. We have to stop believing unethical shills who promote fashionable images of buildings and cities. So I don't know if you use the word shill in India. It is somebody who goes to the marketplace and starts shouting false advertising about a product in order to sell a product. So we have shills who are perhaps include respected architecture critics who write in the major press, who promote crazy images of buildings by star architects. And so the local politicians believe this lie and commission the local politicians commission an international star architect who comes in and builds some monster. Is somebody asking a question?
No, I think go ahead.
Okay, so as far as India is concerned, you have what I have on the slide in front of you. You have the old pieces of the cities and the rural parts that has worked in the past for 2-3 millennia with problems, but there is no well-functioning thing without problems, okay? So the traditional urban fabric has worked in the past. Versus what has been an abysmal failure? Well, you have new glass skyscraper parts in the cities. That is an abysmal failure for the city and for the users, because it eats up an enormous amount of energy that has to be imported as fuel. India does not produce fuel like Saudi Arabia does. All the electricity has to be imported. So when there is an electricity crisis, people in these glass high rises, they have a private generator, or they will just die from the heat. Here's the first reference. I refer to my own papers that are all free online. So if people are interested in what I'm saying, then you can just find these papers free online and read them for further information. And they refer to work by other people. So I'm not just saying that I did all of this. I'm just referring to collections that have extensive references by everyone else. May I have the next slide, please? So here are guidelines for developers. Those are the ones usually private, but also working with the government. These are please reject the flashy alien-looking buildings, because when you compare them with totalitarian ideologies, which were the fascism, Nazism in Germany, they were obsessed with alien-looking symbols of power. The Bolsheviks wanted new, flashy-looking ideologies for buildings. Those lie at the root of monstrous developments that do not work, that we have inherited today. The regulations and codes forbid us today to build a human-scale urban fabric, so that has to be revised, but that's very easy. But it's the politicians that have to do that. You have to convince, the people have to convince the politicians to revise all the regulations so as to allow us to build something that's good for human beings. And then look at the energy costs long term. Inhuman structures usually fall apart or start to fall apart after 20 or 30 years. And they eat up the city's energy budget in order to, because they are wasteful in energy, even so-called LEED certified. They're made with glass and steel, and such buildings start to fall apart after 20, 30 years. These are not long-term economic solutions. Now, here is a very nice little paper. It's not widely known. By Tadani Saab, making Mumbai and other largely pedestrian cities better places to live. I recommend it. Actually, if anyone reads the paper, I could just stop here because Dhiru Tadani has all the solutions that you need. But I'm not going to stop here. I will continue my talk. Next slide, please. So the effective and tested rule for urban space. Let's begin with urban space, first of all. The urban space needs to be used to feel like a giant outdoor room that's open to the sky. It does not have a ceiling, but it's surrounded like a room by welcoming facades. And this is where you have a combination now of urban planning, urban design, and architecture. The facades have to have a welcoming architecture, which means no giant glass curtain walls. And the urban part of it is that the plaza has to be permeable to pedestrian flow. And then we have to protect it from car invasion. That's a separate point. I'll get to that later. Here are two papers. Everything, again, is free online that give the detailed rules for how to design urban spaces that are going to be used. One is with the Italian architect, Pietro Pagliardini. May I have the next slide, please? So when we look at urban spaces that have been designed and built after the Second World War, well, they do all the wrong things. They use disengaging anti-fractal forms and shiny surfaces and hostile materials, and that's wrong, because psychologically it keeps people from entering the space. It keeps people from using it. What are anti-fractal forms? Well, a fractal is something that has structure, and you see the complex structure when you magnify it many times as you want. Whereas just a sheer concrete wall or a glass curtain wall, you magnify it and you see nothing. And you keep magnifying it and you also see nothing. It's an anti-fractal surface, and that is known to cause disengagement with human beings. The second part has to do with the networks. You have to have flows that cross. This is totally ignored by planners today. They just think they can draw a plaza somewhere on a computer and build it, and it's not going to work. No, it's not going to work. A plaza has to concentrate flows that cross it. It all has to do with the pedestrian connectivity. And in order to get that pedestrian connectivity, you absolutely must have mixed use for at least 3 blocks around. No, I'm talking to people in India who see this. It happens every day because you have mixed use and you have a congestion, but congestion up to a certain point is good because it means that people are there, people are using it. But go to the new parts where you have skyscrapers. The plazas are empty. People don't use them because it's just monofunctional or residential. Okay, purely residential, just wasted open space, and you can verify that. May I have the next slide, please? Now, what am I saying? Did my friends and I come up with this now? No, these are rules that have been used for millennia in all cities all around the world with variations due to local climate, and they're embedded in the built forms. So in order to use those rules today, you go and you see where there is a lively city, a city that is working, a city with life, a city that people enjoy again. Congested, because congestion is good up to a certain point where it gets so congested that you cannot do anything. So Keep that in mind, please. Now, Christopher Alexander studied traditional cities and wrote down the rules, which are the design patterns, and he documented them. So any architect can use those to build something today and adapt it to today's circumstances. So it is documented by Christopher Alexander and by others, but it is not widely taught. I'm willing to bet 100 rupees that your institution does not have a one-semester course on design using design patterns. May I have the next slide, please? So these are the Alexandrian patterns. They document methods for achieving partial enclosure in urban spaces in a non-threatening and nourishing way. And they give a checklist for successful urban space. So I'm just mentioning design patterns for urban space, but there are hundreds of design patterns that apply to rooms, the connection of rooms, the shape of a building clusters, the gardens, everything. So I'm just mentioning here the urban spaces because I was talking about urban space. Now these are the important books. The pattern language of Alexander is the classic, and it is well known in India to the older generation, people my age, but then it's forgotten. So Professor Narendra Dengler is a big fan of the pattern language, but young architects don't know about it. Now, Michael Mahaffey and a team, including myself, wrote some new patterns in the new pattern language just 2 years ago, and I want to tell everyone that the entire book is free online. So if you're interested in looking up these patterns, then the second book, the new one, just look to see what these patterns look like out of curiosity, because it's free online. And the last reference here is just an essay on why the patterns didn't work. Were not sufficient to change the direction of architecture for various reasons that are very sad, but people ought to know about something that did not happen to see the reasons and to perhaps try to find a way of achieving that. Next slide, please. So Christopher Alexander, in his later books, which were published from 2001 to 2005, 4 volumes entitled The Nature of Order. These are even less known in India. He gave 15 fundamental properties, which are geometrical properties, and they define living structure. These are very abstract properties that apply to everything, really. They apply to urban plazas. They also apply to rooms, to windows, to doors, to parks, to the shape of a city. This is fantastic information. And now I'm talking about things that occurred 15, 20 years ago. In the last 2 years, my friends and I are starting to verify some of these results using software, which is a visual attention scans, and that software tells you where the eye looks unconsciously. So the neurology of the eye motion is verifying what Christopher Alexander said 15, 20 years ago. May I have the next slide, please? So here is a visual attention scan, and we see a traditional facade. It draws the interest. I see a question. Let me interrupt. Mamta, do you want me to answer questions while I get them or at the end?
No, we'll take them at the end.
Okay, okay. So let me continue this. We see, what do we see? The uniform blue glow, which means that the eye is scanning the entire building. There is geometrical interest in the entire building, and there is just a little bit of focus. You see the orange on the top. The focus is appropriately on the windows and on the window frames. So this is appropriate because that's a part of the composition of the building. May I have the next slide, please? So this is what I said. The repeating symmetrically aligned windows reinforce nested symmetries. Nested symmetries means symmetries within each other, a symmetry within a symmetry within a symmetry. and that engages our unconscious interest. We don't choose to do that. This happens in the first 3 seconds before we even think about it. So this is the evolved human response to engaging information, because we use that information in order to decide if the environment is good for us or it represents a threat. Okay, we did not evolve to engage with buildings. We evolved to walk in the forest, in the bush, to recognize a tiger if the tiger is hiding in the forest, to recognize water, to recognize another person, and then to recognize the symmetries and the details of a face to see if that person is friendly or hostile. To recognize another animal, to see if we can eat the animal, or is the animal going to eat us. So this is the apparatus of the human body and the sensory system. We are applying that apparatus today, whether we like it or not, to interpret the built surroundings. And we cannot ignore that. Now, the last thing here is a terrible comment. Modernist ideology has a goal to undo visceral human connection. It pretends that we do not connect in this way, but that just leads to terrible stress that adds on top of the stress that that we encounter in our day-to-day negotiations. May I have the next slide, please? So concrete boxes are inhuman. They breed alienation and depression, not for ethical reasons, because of neurophysiology. I want to point one thing and insist on one thing, and that has to do with babies and young children. Minimalist interiors could lower the IQ of a baby. This is a hypothesis, and I'm going to give as much information as possible here. You have a density in urban environments. Okay, we cannot undo that, but we can certainly transform the ground floors and open spaces into a better environments, and we can encourage high-rise residents to transform their interiors. Now, this applies not so much to the low-income residents, because the low-income residents couldn't care less about architectural style. They try to survive every day. People in Dharavi just want to get their meal and water to drink. So, but when somebody in the self-built settlements finds some paint, they will use the paint to make something beautiful in order to put up with the terrible stress of their life that they live. What I'm talking about is the upper class. The upper class resident who has read all this propaganda from the press and the media, who tell them that they have to have a minimalist environment to copy Europe, and so they raise their babies in minimalist environments. I'm warning the high class, the high income people. They could be doing terrible damage to their families. Next slide, please. So the most harmful effects of bad design and planning occur in children because they're the most sensitive. If the children cannot connect to life, then they're prisoners in a nightmare world that they cannot negotiate, especially in the car-centered and car-dependent environment. The child cannot do anything, cannot go anywhere. They're totally dependent on the adults. They cannot even go outside their front door. The inhuman environment stunts them. In our societies, and I'm not excluding anyone here, all around the world, we have sacrificed the children to ideology and megalomania and power. Certain companies, global companies, are extracting a lot of money. But on the other hand, you have a modernist ideology that's promoted by the media and certain pseudo-intellectuals. Next slide, please. So here are some data that I'm not giving the data, but they're referred to in these papers. A brain developing in a minimalist environment becomes insufficiently wired, And then you can measure, these are experiments. Smaller cortical mass, the cortex is the part of the brain that engages in thinking, are found in fish and mice in the two groups where you have a information-rich environment versus a minimalist environment. So these are significant differences in fish and mice. You can guess what happens in humans. Something similar is going to happen in humans. We have not done. You cannot do the experiments, but this is frightening. These are frightening results. And we published this article in 10 years ago. Nobody paid any attention to it. People continue to hire architects to build minimalist buildings in interior environments, and even the people who can make their environment, the people who have young children who can make their environment more interesting using paint and ornamentation and interesting things, refuse to do so because they're stuck with the minimalist ideology. It's like another religion, but it's a horrible religion because it destroys human beings. Next slide, please. So this is two more papers, very recent papers by my colleagues Marco Aresta, who is an architect, and Alexandros Lavdas, who is a neuroscientist. So we wrote two different papers about the COVID-19. We now see a huge drop in the IQ of children who were born during the COVID-19, and nobody can understand why this is so. Okay, this is not our measurement. This is measurement by two different sets of doctors in the United States, two different cities in the United States. We speculate that one cause is the contemporary minimalist environments, because these were not children in poor families; these were children in middle-class families. Both sets of data. And we have older data from Romanian orphanages where children were raised in sensory deprived environments, and their IQ was similarly lowered because of neglect, informational neglect. So these are links. We're putting together a jigsaw puzzle, and the picture we see of the jigsaw puzzle is a frightening picture. And young architects, like the people who are listening today, should pay attention to this frightening picture. Next slide, please. Okay, so, well, I have said all of this. The solution is to transform the geometries that are fashionable today and have been for the last 60 or 70 years into new geometries that keep us mentally and physically happy. Why hasn't this been done? Because the geometries that keep us mentally and physically healthy are old-fashioned. They look old-fashioned. And architecture schools have taught their graduates that whatever they do, they cannot make something that looks old-fashioned. But that's the solution. So you better start ignoring that. In order to create a better architecture that's better for people. Next slide, please. So a new topic that has become important in the last few years, just 2, 3, 4 years, is biophilia. Biophilia is the love of life and the geometry of living systems. There are a vast amount of experiments that show that we need intimate contact with complex green ecosystems. They are healing. They actually heal us from various diseases. So we should transform open space to include many pocket parks, green, wherever that is not there. So this means try to introduce street trees next to buildings, avoid formal planning where the government just makes one big park or useless ornamental lawn. Ornamental lawn doesn't do anything. What you need is just many small pocket parks, even if they're very, very small, because this creates intimate contact with people, and the biophilia effect then can start to work. Of course, these have to be protected from encroachment by other forces in the urban environment. Next slide, please. This is the biophilia is shown in ornament. Next slide, please. There are misunderstandings in the planning laws. As I mentioned earlier, the government just receives payment from some special interest that destroy the native green spaces. But the native green spaces are healing the people. So this is a crime against the city. It's a crime against humanity. Promises to introduce more urban green are interpreted in the modernist mindset, which is not connected to people's needs, okay? The modernist mindset is a giant lawn. That's useless. The solution is a necklace, connected smaller green spaces with bushes and trees, but many, many, many of them. That's the solution for introducing biophilia into the cities. Next slide, please. So here I'm going to introduce the visual attention software by 3M Company. And that determines the unconscious engagement between the body and the environment, a tree, a building, a group of buildings, and urban space. This engagement is never obvious from photos, never obvious from a design on a computer screen. So this is both a diagnostic and a test for something before it is built in order to catch mistakes. Next slide, please. This is the ideal as taught today to architects, minimalist facade, but it's invisible. It's totally useless and oppressive. Next slide, please. Here is the VAS scan. This facade might as well not be there. The eye avoids it completely and looks at the corners. Okay, this facade is not human. It does not engage with the human being. Next slide, please. Here we introduce some ornament. Next slide, please. Surprise, surprise. The eye is drawn to the ornament. We engage with this facade because of the ornament. Next slide, please. So we need a new national conscience. And again, we go to the responsible authorities. The responsible authorities have to be responding to the people and not to special interests and to outdated ideologies that have proven harmful for the people. The authorities should sponsor environmental geometry that incorporates interior and exterior ornament. We have a responsibility to resurrect cultural heritage, which we stupidly allowed modernist architects to destroy over many decades. The promotion of modernism promotes a minimalist design style that destroys all of cultural heritage because cultural heritage is ornamented. All of that is lost, and still today we continue to lose the cultural heritage. Next slide, please. Instead of that damage, we need to trigger the sense of belonging, which is good for our health. So we human beings attach to the environment through the information. We have a shared geometrical basis with all living structure. We are not separate from living structure. We're just one of many animals, and whatever thing on the earth has DNA has a shared structure, and we have affinities with it. So we are not some alien form that just happened to arrive on the earth with totally different needs and tastes. No, we have the same taste because we have evolved mechanisms for cognitive and emotional attachment. We emotionally attach to to other human beings, to our family members, to our pets, to other humans who may be strangers. We emotionally attach in order to generate a sense of belonging. This sense of belonging is what creates a successful building, a successful city, a successful urban space. Next slide, please. So here is a paper on visual engagement using the visual attention scans. Let's skip that. Next one. Next slide, please. So why build a large structure if we don't look at it? We have now the diagnostic of the visual attention scan that will tell us, does this building help to create a better city? Very, very easy. So this is another paper on as a reference here that triggers engagement and creates a city that's, that we feel connected to when we use the city. Next slide, please. So here are two buildings that, by coincidence, you have an older building situated right in front of a glass wall skyscrapers, and on the right, the visual attention scan proves what I'm telling you. The attention and connection of the human being in unconscious for the first 3 seconds of gaze is with the older structure. We don't even look at the glass wall skyscraper behind. It might as well not be there, but if it's next to us, we feel a horrible oppression by this unknown huge thing that creates anxiety. Next slide, please. So some networks which address the urban scale. All I want to say here is that we need the networks to protect the weaker flow whenever the flows cross. So let me translate that to urban networks. The weakest flow is the pedestrian. So we need to protect the pedestrian because the network contains all sorts of other flows, namely cars. In India, you have the rickshaws, buses, public transport, trucks. All of this stuff, if allowed, free for all, will just overwhelm the pedestrian. And that's what's happening. You cannot cross the street because it's, you take your life into your own hands. So, but there are design techniques that are not applied here. Those design techniques were developed in Europe in the 1920s when the first cars were introduced. Those just were applied for about 10 years and then scrapped altogether. But that's the golden age, when the cars and the trucks could coexist with the pedestrians, but the pedestrians were protected. All we need to do is to go back and find those again and re-implement them. Next slide, please. So we have to reroute some streets, but that's expensive. But in many places that's going to be necessary. Focus on the adaptive urban spaces, and again protect the open spaces so that they're usable by pedestrians and not taken over entirely by vehicular traffic. Here on the bottom is another talk: spontaneous cities. How we can get, we can take lessons from spontaneous settlements that formal planning just want to erase. But no. Spontaneous cities have urban DNA that can give lesson to the wealthy city on how to fix its mistakes. So if you're interested in that, please look at this paper. Next slide, please. Okay, we can skip that, but no, let's go back, please. This book with Michael Mahaffey, Design for a Living Planet, let me tell all the students here, this puts together the chapters that appeared online as individual articles. So in order to read this book for free, all you have to do is find the individual chapters that are still online for free for Design for a Living Planet. So I'm sure you can locate this. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here is a contemporary urban space that's a total failure when you look at the visual attention scan, because look at where the attention is, the hot spots. The hot spots are the parking sign in the middle, and then another sign that's a traffic sign on the left, and then a little bit on the reflection of the sky on a little creek here. The eye does not go to any of the architecture. It does not go to the floor. This is an open space that you're supposed to walk on. It has this huge barrier, this fence. None of this attracts attention. This is a dead space. This is what we have been building for decades because it is approved. Now compare that to an old-fashioned, crowded, congested urban space where you have hundreds of people, if not thousands of people. That's the good model. This is a terrible model. This is a total failure because it's dead. Next slide, please. Okay, all I say here is that you have a dead urban space generates mental fatigue and stress. So it's not an aesthetic judgment. It is a biological judgment. It's a judgment having to do with medical condition in our body. The people are stressed and they get sick over the long term. It's just inhuman design. This is our latest paper with Brielman, Buras, and Taylor. And it's open publication, and it looks at the neurophysiological mechanisms that come into play when you walk down the street and you perceive the direction and what's in front of you and the urban space. Next slide, please. So, okay, here we have the conclusion. Honest legislators should fight the corruption that ties the building industry to an economic engine that works only for special interests. It cares about building anything in order to make money. It doesn't care about the health of the users. The motto of this industry is destroy and replace. Namely, come in, destroy something, even if it's very good and only needs a little bit of repair, destroy it and replace it because we're going to make much more money by destroying and replacing. So you have a short-term turnover, again, a lot of money, a lot of power. Government gets seduced into bringing star architects, foreigners who build totally useless projects, extremely expensive. Somebody makes a lot of money. The city has to suffer with this inhuman structure for 100 years after, or maybe 30 years until the whole thing collapses because it's so poorly built. Beware of the promise of a smart city. Promises of a smart city do not change the urban geometry. What I have been talking about for 45 minutes is changing the urban geometry, not putting in sensors and cameras, okay? That's not going to solve urban problems. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide. The good way to do things. Use the latest technologies we have in order to enable global connectivity, which means that we can remove some of the energy wasteful commuting, but then that means that locally where we live, we need a very human urban geometry so that we can live a very healthy life. So we need to insist upon all the points I have made today in order to create a human geometry so that we can enjoy our local environment. That's it. Thank you very much. Let's go to the questions now.
Thank you for this great presentation. I would like to call Ankush to continue this with a discussion.
Hi, good evening, Professor Salingaros. That was really an amazing talk. I mean, it really resonated quite a bit. especially when, I mean, you were talking about the effects of this capital-driven modernist sort of architecture and how it affects intellectual development itself. I think we've all seen that in some way or the other. The pandemic sort of restriction of people in blocks, and I mean, it's really not even. I don't think it's even just for kids. Even for adults, like the cognitive sort of understanding has really changed quite a bit. So that was, in fact. I mean, the sort of remedial, strategies that you suggest, like biophilia, for instance, it kind of reminded me a little bit of how Indian architects also have been talking about space and about the sky and metaphysical. For instance, Charles Correa. So it really, I mean, I think it's really just like I don't know, legacy education that has been passed on for ages, like you said. I mean, it's also been so that was quite nice. I actually wanted to maybe I ask you about the methods to read sort of urban experience that you showed. I mean, whether it's with visual attention software and the eye scans and all that. That's quite fascinating. And we ourselves have been experimenting with some of these kind of tracking methods to sense engagement in the master's program and the bachelor's as well now. We're kind of using, I mean, tracking of movements for time spent in places, etc. So I was wondering what the kind of progress is in that sort of in that kind of like a research into understanding urban experience itself. I mean, for instance, I noticed in the photographs that all the attention spots on the photographs, the greens and the yellows, they were all concentrated on objects, on detail, right? But what happens when you also associate voids with it, or the whole semiotic branch to it? I mean, what people associate with the meanings that objects hold. How far has this research really sort of progressed by now?
Yes, Ankush, I'm not sure I understand your question. The visual attention scans look strictly at visual attention, not at meanings.
Okay.
It's inside the human mind, and it is dependent upon learning. Okay. What we do, let's not overextend what we do. What we do and other people do just looks at where the eye scans. The eye inputs information, but it's important because it is unconscious.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is very important because you see something that you do not connect to.
Right.
The eye doesn't go there. So you take the visual attention scan of an award-winning building, and you see that you don't look at the award-winning building. It's useless.
Right.
Now, what you said comes after. After you look at something, and then the information comes into the brain, and then it is interpreted, and then you assign meaning. That's after the visual attention scan. It's not related. Of course, it is an important part of the reaction. So, for example, in heritage architecture, you look at something and you engage with it because heritage architecture, the architects knew how to engage. So the visual attention scan comes out beautiful. It's full.
Right.
It's not concentrated just on the corner. It's full. After that, though, after the first few seconds, then you start to connect it to what you already know. And if that's your own heritage, then you say, oh, yes, this brings us back to my heritage, and you have a good feeling about it.
Right.
But that's separate, okay? We need to disassociate that. It also, look at the glories of Islamic architecture, of which you have many in India, even though Hindus are not able to read the text. But somebody who can read Arabic, okay, they engage with the building according to the visual attention scan, and then they can read the text. So there is a further engagement after that.
Right. Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, the idea of like subconsciously or like doing it, like you said, before the first 3 seconds or before you've even thought about it, yeah, I think that's good. The other thing I sort of wanted to ask was, and this comes from the background of like what's been happening in Bombay for a while. I mean, when you talk about, say, public projects, and I'm talking specifically about transportation design in cities, when you're talking about trying to go back to earlier sort of innate knowledge of public transportation, etc. how do you take a call on what's the larger good versus specific realities? For example, in Bombay, there is a new metro car shed that's being proposed in RA. So now that's being proposed in what's a forest in and it's what's considered the lungs of a city, and there's also displacement of indigenous communities that are actually occupying the area, right? So how do you in that sense, is there a logical sort of pattern or some sort of strategy that we may be able to follow to take that call on whether it's worthwhile to do that for the greater good?
Thank you, Ankush. You're trying to get me into a lot of trouble with the government authorities. I have been reading in the Times of India about this project, but I'm not expert enough in order to offer an opinion. Please ask Dhiru Thadani, who is from Mumbai, and he's very interested, and he may be up to date. You will get a very professional opinion, okay? I don't want to give an opinion on something that I just read the headlines in the newspaper. That's unprofessional. You know, somebody needs to have a deep understanding. Now, in general, there are compromises to be made, but compromises have to have priorities. So what are the priorities? Okay, you balance the priorities. So in any project, you have to have the priorities. What I have said in my talk, okay, forget this present project. But in the past, the priority has been given to a small group of people making a lot of money, and to hell with the public. That's absolutely the wrong choice.
Right. Once again, I think I'd just like to thank you for that. It's really nice talk. It was very refreshing. I would maybe ask if anyone else. I think in the chat box we have a couple of questions. So maybe we can take that, Janvi.
Hi, Nikos. Janvi, I'd like to say hello to Nikos. Nikos, this is Shantanu Puredi. You're here because we have a common friend, Anand Bhatt.
And yes.
Yeah. He was schoolmate with me in Ahmedabad 30 years ago. And I've been watching your lectures online. So that's the other thing. I've been following you online and watching your lectures, which you put out there. And thank you for that. And the culmination after watching few of your lectures was that we get you on our encounters. So thanks for doing this for us from the school. We really thank you for that. I'd just like to bring up one more point, and I do agree the culprit is the modernist sort of architects who sort of started looking at architecture stripped down of its let's say embellishments and ornament. And maybe Adolf Loos was one of the guys who started that, or many more than him. But coming to it, there is a reaction, and I think that's very interesting that we need to look at is also the buildings have become containers, which you say very clearly, and without embellishment. But the reaction is the architecture, which is what we call the interior urbanism. There is a whole life of urbanism that has moved inside the building, and it's maybe a reaction to the way even script of today, even the bylaws are written, which are structured around modernist architecture. So we react to our code, the city's codes, which are a very modernist kind of regime. Codes are also written like that. But the insides of the building, which are now, because we have the technology, they're large, they're deep, and they tend to take on the life that you talk about, which is this urbanism that is vibrant and colorful. So if you could, I think it's maybe a commentary on what I'm saying rather than it's a reaction to maybe there is a hope, is what I'm trying to come to.
Well, thank you, Shantanu. What you were referring to is the transferring of city life to the indoor private domain.
Yeah.
No, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Despite my talk, I'm not a Marxist. I'm an American capitalist. So I encourage capitalism. So corporations that build malls and private urban spaces have created very attractive indoor urban spaces that are private in order to draw people away from the public urban space. That's an opportunity for profit, and they're making profit. So if somebody in a democratic society sees an opportunity for profit that does not destroy people and do harm, then good, they do something. But that tells you that the urban space has been neglected. So the government did not do its good job of maintaining the public urban space so that people have to go to the private urban space in order to get the experience of rich information and being protected from trucks running them down. So this is a natural occurrence, but it occurred because of a mistake that the city government made. So it is perfectly healthy to have public urban space and private urban space coexist in a dynamic competition. That's perfectly fine in a democratic society. What is not perfectly fine is the extreme, because in the last few days I have been seeing pictures of a nightmare, an absolute nightmare that's going to occur in Saudi. Totally enclosed interior urban space in a prison of millions of people. A nightmare dream. Okay, I'm not going to comment anymore on that. If they want to build it, they can build it.
Yeah, I do agree, but I mean, it's just a reaction. So that's the reaction now to the loss of public space. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a loss to lose our public spaces. Someone else? Anybody else with questions? Ankush, you can take over.
Yeah, I would like to call
I think
Manoj
Mamta
to
has a
continue
fascinating sort of
the
question.
discussion. Manoj?
Yeah,
Please
hi,
continue.
Professor Nikos. I'm
Nice.
Manoj Parmar, director of the institute, and
Oh,
we have two common friends, Narendra Dengle and Dhiru Thadani.
yes,
And perhaps we might have a third common friend, maybe from University of Miami, Elizabeth Plato-Zyberg. If
yes,
you, yeah. So I studied at University of Miami, so
oh,
and I think we have exchanged a lot of emails before COVID on some issues that we were talking in a common group with Dengle. So it's a great lecture, a great insight into way in which a city should be relooked at, and I think very fascinating ideas that we should explore in look at in academic environment. Thank you very much.
yes. And Manoj, Mr. Director, let me
Yeah.
apologize. I was intentionally inflammatory in order to get the students excited, because today students are not excited about anything. If they're excited, they will read more things, and it's always good.
Yeah.
Even if they don't agree with me, they will read more things. They will open their mind. They will get more information.
Correct. Yeah. It's great to have you on this platform, and perhaps sometime more desirable circumstances, we would like to have you in physical space.
Yes, I would love to do that. And but even before that, I lecture to institutions all over the world. I give mini courses with Zoom. We have become now used to giving courses by Zoom. And Shantanu mentioned our mutual friend Anand Bhatt posts lectures from my courses so that they're available for students.
Great.
I think
Yes.
today's technology really is opening up a new universe where students who are interested have access to free information.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Janvi, you can take it over.
Yeah, so there are a few questions in the chat box. I'll just read one of them and then you could just answer it. Yeah. Someone has asked, mathematics is never adequately discussed in the spatial design courses. How do you make mathematical concepts such as set theory more accessible to architects, urban designers, and planners?
Anyone who wants to learn about set theory can go to two sources. Wikipedia has good descriptions of mathematical concepts, and then there is Wolfram Math World, that is a free online math source. However, okay, mathematics is a separate discipline. Okay, you can take 10 years to learn mathematics. What architects and urbanists need to know are just a few concepts. So this is my advice. If you come across a mathematical tool that you think is interesting, then you learn about that. Okay, you don't want to learn all of mathematics because it's a different topic. The beginnings of any mathematical tool are fairly easy to learn. So my answer is just to read some things online, but do that in response to something that you have seen that you may need in architecture and urbanism. I don't know if that answers. This is for Isaac. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, the Shravan has asked that in what ways has modernist car-dependent planning survived the counterculture pushback against modernism that many cities are seeing in the 21st century?
Okay, Shravan, I don't see any countercultural pushback. The countercultural pushback is always marginalized because those who are pushing against modernism in the cities are not in a position of making decisions. They're totally ignored by the powers. The powers are firmly behind modernism because the construction industry, the regulatory industry, and the architectural associations are making a lot of money just from building the same glass and steel boxes. So why should they change? There's an inertia. You know, these are not bad people. There is an inertia if you're making money and having your profession continuing with doing a certain sort of thing. There is a resistance to change. So those who are pushing against that are not in any position to make any difference. And you have to dig into, say, local news to see that there are groups, but usually they cannot affect any change.
Okay, thank you. There's a student from Nepal who would like to ask how children architecture should be incorporated into urban planning, and especially how an urban city creates a sense of belongingness for children.
Okay, this is Roshana from Nepal. Oh, Roshana, before I answer, let me tell you that my book, Form, Language, and Architecture, is available in Nepalese. My publisher in Kathmandu convinced me that it would be important to translate my latest book into Nepalese. So please get my book, and that will answer your question. So now to answer your question, how the city creates a sense of belongingness for children. Well, you go down on your knees and elbows, and you get the perspective of the child. Do you feel safe? Do you feel that the distances you can crawl are good? Do you feel threatened by anything in the geometry? Do you feel threatened by traffic? Do you feel threatened by large distances? The child's world is a smaller world. We totally ignore that nowadays. For the last 50 years, we have ignored the world of the child. So the world of the child has to be smaller distances, smaller dimensions, more protected. And starting from that, then we can, or you can rediscover what it would take to make the urban scale more belonging to the children. Now, there are two worlds, of course. The indoor world, which I have criticized. I have even criticized the world inside an apartment because it is not rich enough in information today. That's one problem. The other problem that you raise is the world outside the urban space. That's usually it's a catastrophe for children because it is so stress-inducing in today's environments. Either because of over-congestion in the traditional cities, in Nepal, which I've never been to, Nepal and India, because there's so much congestion, because there is a free-for-all, and the pedestrians are not protected, so it's frightening to the child. Or in the new type of development, it's totally isolated. It's a dead geometry. The child feels, well, it does not feel threatened by cars and too many other people, but it feels anxious because there's nothing there. It's just a total emptiness, and that's not a place for belonging. Okay, more questions?
Anyone who has any questions can ask right now. I guess we're done with the questions, so we'll end this discussion. Thank you so much for this great presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Nikos. I think that it's wonderful having you here with the inputs that you have given us. I'm glad that we could get Ankush on board to quiz you on it. And yes, we'd love to have you here in the physical space the next time you're around. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mamta.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.